Hi, my name is Mia Halama, and today I'll be presenting my research project on Moonlight and cultural relevance for the honors contract. To begin, I want to start by sharing my guiding research questions for this project. At first, I was looking at why Moonlight came out in 2016. I also wanted to look at the kind of influence it had on pop culture at the time and what its cultural relevance was. To begin to analyze Moonlight, it's important to review the history of LGBTQ+ representation in film. For the purpose of this project, I'll be focusing on queer representation in the US only. Film was invented around 1895. It spent the first few decades of its life experimenting, figuring out who it was and what it wanted to be. When the Great Depression hit in the 1930s, a lot of film studios began more prominently featuring sex, drugs, and violence in order to draw people into theaters. This didn't exactly go in their favor, though. Parents were not happy that their children being subject to the mature nature of these movies. So, the Hays Code was instituted. Chelsea O'Brien, a film curator with ACMI, explains that the Hays Code was a self-imposed industry set of guidelines for all the motion pictures that were released between 1934 and 1968. If a film followed the guidelines of the Hays Code, it was given a seal. If a film didn't have a seal, major studios could not release that film. Though the Hays Code was highly controversial for many reasons, today I'll be focusing on one reason in particular. Rule number 4 under Section 2 of the Hays Code states that sex perversion or any inference to it is forbidden. In the time that the code was written, sex perversion referred to and included acts or displays of homosexuality. Especially since it was against the law, homosexuality on screen was prohibited. While the Hays Code was ended in 1968, that didn't signal an automatic acceptance of queer film. However, it did signal a time of liberation and release. Pat Rocco, an American filmmaker, quickly became a prominent name at the Los Angeles Park Theater's Most Unusual Film Festival. According to Brian Woost in the 29th volume of Film History, the festival advertised itself as the very first assemblage of films of interest to the adult homosexual, as well as those interested in understanding homosexuality. From 1968 to 1971, Rocco's work was frequently shown and his name frequently mentioned. As Woost explains, historians often frame this period at the park as a turning point in the nature, volume, and openness of gay filmic representation in the United States. By most accounts, it was the first instance of publicly advertised gay programming with regular theatrical exhibition. This was a big moment for queer films. Restrictions had been lifted on mainstream film, and filmmakers were free to create to their heart's desire. As 1968 went on, however, gay film was shifting from softcore to hardcore. Woost's article details the increased desire to watch gay pornography as opposed to gay stories. Rocco refused to give in, saying that he was not actually a pornographer, but rather a creator of story films. He separated himself from the hardcore gay films, insisting that his films were story films. At a time when all people wanted to watch was the physical act, Rocco separated himself by creating a story and meticulously thought-out film. Rocco thought of hardcore films as only trying to get a certain reaction from audiences. He believed them to be hardcore just for the sake of being hardcore. What Rocco valued most in his films was the beauty of male love. While his filmography cannot be confined to narrative-driven stories, as he made many gay films that did not all follow that structure, his stories are what he is best remembered for. Rocco wanted his films to closely resemble conventional narrative Hollywood films. According to Woost, this would have the effect not only of elevating his films' respectability through their resemblance to mainstream film, but also of normalizing representations of gayness by equating them with the heterosexual images dominant in conventional Hollywood film. He was trying to bring pride and dignity to an audience which very much needs to love and respect itself. He was in the business of legitimizing gay love, which wasn't a common thing at the time. Given this, one could say that Pat Rocco paved the way for narrative gay film. While his prominence in the gay filmmaking industry for a couple years cannot account for the entirety of LGBTQ+ film history, Rocco's films offer an example of the complex processes determining how media is framed and understood in its time and what place it is afforded in history. It's no surprise that gay film has had a hard time making it into the mainstream. While Pat Rocco is a prominent figure within the world of gay media, he's no Martin Scorsese or Christopher Nolan. An article written by Christopher Kelly in the 35th volume of Film Comments details the problem with gay cinema in the 1990s. Disappointed by the lack of maturation of gay cinema, Kelly comments, "Having moved from baby steps to growing pains, the gay cinema never quite attained adulthood. If anything, it has remained stuck in an almost literal adolescence." In fact, Kelly's qualms with gay cinema of the 90s bear similarity to Rocco's. 90s gay films endorsed absurd gay stereotypes in the service of cheap, mindless titillation. He argues the same as Rocco, speaking out against the mindless, sex-driven gay films of his age. Where are the gay-made films about gay teachers, gay lawyers, gay writers, gay professional sportsmen? Where are the gay-made films that chronicle the everyday frustrations and joys of gay life? Where are the gay films in which the character's gayness is a given? Nothing to be proclaimed or shouted out, but simply one additional detail to be accounted for. Despite cinema's advancements, gay film hadn't quite evolved along with mainstream heterosexual film. The gay films that Kelly complains about have less to do with the story and more to do with the act of being gay. Near the end of his article, Kelly says, "Homosexuality does not exist in a vacuum. What the gay cinema demands are works, in which homosexuality, as in real life, is essential to both character and story, but does not define either." This is a powerful statement. In our hurry to celebrate gay culture in film, we forget that being gay is just like being straight. It doesn't have to be shouted out or relentlessly thrown in the viewer's face. It can simply exist as a fact and doesn't need to define the character or the story. I think that Kelly would have really enjoyed Moonlight, actually. Moving on to another Brian Woost article from 2018 in the Journal of Film and Video, we can take another look at the progress of gay cinema around the time that Moonlight was released. In this article, Woost discusses the distribution and marketing surrounding queer films. In some cases, companies can intentionally define a film as gay before defining it as a rom-com or a romance, while in other cases, companies can deliberately leave LGBTQ+ meaning out of its definition entirely. Throughout the article, Wolf Videos is a name that frequently comes up. They pretty much paved the way for the categorization of films as LGBT. It started with getting DVDs of their queer films into video stores, which founder Kathy Wolf was pleased with, since there was the chance that if these movies were on the shelves of a video store, straight consumers might pick one up and watch an LGBT-themed story they might not otherwise see, as Woost explains. Being able to place Wolf Video films on shelves was monumental, but their progress didn't stop there. In 2012, they made a deal with Hulu to create a gay and lesbian genre category. Wolf saw this as a good thing, focusing on the benefits for newly out LGBT youth and LGBT people living in areas where they do not have local access to LGBT media, calling such access a socio-cultural lifeline for these people. Before this, LGBTQ+ content was not easily searchable. There's also the issue of what constitutes a gay and lesbian category movie, but for the most part, this categorization was seen as a good thing. New members of the community could easily search for movies to validate their experiences. As Woost argues, however, this label does not correlate to a neat, well-defined category into which films clearly do or do not fit. A text's identity is highly contingent. In his article, there's a lot of discussion about the legitimacy of these labels and how a film and its reception can be influenced by exhibition and advertising. Without a doubt, there was significant progress in the acceptance of queer film by the time Moonlight came out. Moonlight, with its 2016 release date, came at a time of liberation and acceptance. Starting in 2009 and extending throughout the length of his presidency, former President Barack Obama made unbelievable progress towards equality that the 1930s never could have dreamed of. In 2015, according to the White House archives, Obama said, "We are big and vast and diverse, a nation of people with different backgrounds and beliefs, different experiences and stories, but bound by our shared ideal that no matter who you are or what you look like, how you started off, or how and who you love, America is a place where you can write your own destiny." There's no question that he supported LGBTQ+ rights and ensured that no matter what someone identified as, they were protected in the US. Combined with the acceptance and categorization of gay film in mainstream media, things were looking pretty good for Barry Jenkins' film. Moonlight doesn't hide from its queerness, but it also doesn't boast of it. In its official trailer on the A24 YouTube page, it includes moments between Chiron and his male love interest. It clearly implies that this film is about a gay man, but that's not all there is to the story. Jenkins seems to take Rocco's approach to gay filmmaking. He keeps it about the story. In an interview with Nicholas Rapold in an issue of Film Comment, Jenkins talks about how deeply personal the film is to him. He and the playwright, Terrell McCraney, grew up similarly. They both grew up a block away from the apartment in the film, attended the same elementary school, and had mothers with crack cocaine addictions. For Jenkins, this was an autobiographical release. It was something he'd always wanted to talk about. This film was intentional in its every move. The way the characters were shot was an especially important choice. Jenkins tells Rapold, "We wanted to find a few little moments to use the idea of the actors looking right at the camera. And I also thought it was very important to have the audience look right into the eyes of a man who is very sensually thinking of another man." This is the only mention of Chiron being gay throughout the entire interview. When he does mention it, it's very intentional. Moonlight doesn't shy away from being gay, as is made clear by its inclusion. To have the audience stare into the eyes of Chiron as he thinks of another man is like Jenkins taking the audience by the face and saying, "This is who he is. This is who he's allowed to be." The film isn't defined by its queerness, though it is an important characteristic. An essay by Claire Dunn at the University of Regina details the messaging included in the film. As Dunn says, while it handles issues that many Black queer men face, like not fitting into the ideals of masculinity, experiencing homophobia, and figuring out one's identity with grace, compassion, and respect, it also addresses issues of difference, power, and discrimination through the lens of masculinity and homophobia by showing critical points in Chiron's life through the use of various film techniques, which places the audience in the film with Chiron. Dunn states that even those who aren't queer will find something to relate to within the film, whether it be racial discrimination, poverty, addiction, or just plain growing up. At the end of the day, Moonlight tells us a story about a Black boy growing up in Miami. Dunn calls Moonlight important for many Black queer boys and men who rarely see themselves represented on screen but are often marginalized in their communities. This film caused critic Hilton Als to ask the following rhetorical question: "Did I ever imagine during my anxious, closeted childhood that I'd live long enough to see a movie like Moonlight? Did any gay man who came of age, as I did, in the era of Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and AIDS, think he'd survive to see a version of his life told on screen with such knowledge, unpredictability, and grace?" This film isn't just about Chiron surviving, but rather thriving as a gay Black man. Raquel Gates, in Film Quarterly, describes how the film racked up a slew of awards, and from its run at film festivals through its culminating Best Picture win at the Academy Awards, the film's cinematography was singled out for special praise. Not only was this film successful in its telling of a queer Black story, but it was also incredibly successful in the mainstream media. This means that people from all over witnessed Jenkins' powerful storytelling and its strong messaging. What makes Jenkins' film so unique is its dedication to the storytelling. Not necessarily the story of a gay man or a Black man, but the story of Chiron. He is the center of the film, and none of the messaging or storytelling would work without him. I've seen a few LGBTQ plus films, and while films like Call Me By Your Name and Morris have similarities, they have different goals and ways of getting there. All three of these films are centered in realism. They use sound as a tool to tell a story. Whether it be silence, diegetic sound, dialogue, or a powerful score, sound is an intentional storytelling tool in each film. Call Me By Your Name tells the story of a young Italian teenager, Elio, falling in love with an older American man, Oliver. While the majority of the film romanticizes their relationship and falling in love in Italy, the end of the film ends in heartbreak when Elio discovers that Oliver is getting married to a woman. Likewise, most of Morris is about Morris and Clive's romantic relationship. By the end of the film, Morris and Clive are separated, and Clive reminisces of the times he had with Morris. In both of these films, the relationship doesn't work out. In both of these films, the relationship is the hardship that the characters endure. They both end on a rather pessimistic note. With Moonlight, however, the ending is rather optimistic for Chiron. Though he endures hardships like an absent mother with an addiction, bullying, and loss, his relationship with Kevin seems to be one of the only positive and constant in his life. I think Jenkins is trying to show that a man's gayness and gay relationship does not have to be at the center of the film in order to be important. This ending for Chiron is infinitely more powerful than what Call Me By Your Name and Morris tries to do. Chiron's sexuality didn't have to be another negative. Rather, it represented resilience and hope for Chiron. To bring it back to my guiding research questions, I want to attempt to answer these. Moonlight came out in 2016 as a turning point in queer history. By this point, President Barack Obama had made strides towards freedom and liberty for people representing as what they choose. The influence it had on pop culture is this sense of liberation and release. Throughout history, there have been attempts to make LGBTQ plus films, but I don't think any one has been as successful as Moonlight was. Though films like My Own Private Idaho and Brokeback Mountain are critically acclaimed, it just doesn't have the same meaning and influence as Moonlight has had. As for its cultural relevance, I think that Moonlight fits perfectly in 2016. It's a good representation of where film can be headed. It is a great place for film to be at its time, and hopefully we see more films like it in the coming years. To conclude, Moonlight is an excellent film, and Jenkins' dedication to storytelling and using tools to tell Chiron's story is phenomenal. I think it was a great film, and this is my project. Hope you guys liked it. Thank you.